Avengers Age of Ultron is garbage, folks.
Is it an alligator or a crocodile? I don't know the difference, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask.
Look at that. That is a werewolf, folks.
Welcome to Marvel Standom, where we like to dig into the world of Marvel Comics, the MCU, and sometimes some weird-ass Marvel stuff from the past. I'm your host, Den of Geek News and Features Editor Kirsten Howard, and joining me live this week are Den of Geek TV Editor Alec Bajalad, pop culture writer, Den of Geek contributor, and my biological son, Joe George. And for the first time on this show, we're lucky to have Tim Worthington, host of the Marvel podcast, It's Good, Except It Sucks. Thank you, Tim, for joining us to talk about the first episode of Secret Invasion, which had some big shocks, but we'll get to those in a bit. Tim, can you tell us a bit about your background and your podcast?
Right, well, I usually describe myself as writer and occasional broadcaster because I do write a lot. I very occasionally broadcast. If you're in the UK, if you've ever got Channel 5 on at 3 a.m, there's a very good chance you'll see me talking about TV's most disastrous disasters, or one of those clip show things, occasionally on the radio, but generally you'll find me in Doctor Who magazine, Vintage Rock magazine, places like that. I contribute sort of bits and pieces about overlooked, really, or undervalued pop culture from the past to a lot of places, but I do have my own site, timworthington.org, which is where you'll find my Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. It's Good, Except It Sucks, which, Kirsten, you've actually been on talking about Werewolf by Night.
Yes. The
story behind all of that, it kind of got out of control because I just started it more or less in anger when, there was the big tranche of Ken Loach, Martin Scorsese, Jennifer Aniston, all kinds of people going over the mark. They weren't just content to say, I'm not interested in superhero films. It had to be everyone who watches them is helping Hitler win. They're killing pure cinema. We will stop this. So that's kind of where, the name comes from in Infinity War, on the Star-Lord's line. But I kind of felt it suited it because I'm not saying these things are high art, but they're worthy of so much more discussion than, a really sniffy critical dismissal. And it started with it was the first 6 or so episodes of it are just my mates and the people I go to the cinema with. And that was the ethos of it, really. In fact, you can hear the one about the Incredible Hulk with Gary Bainbridge was recorded in a cafe. You can actually just about tell that. But then lockdown happened. It became a more serious thing. It was sort of roping in everyone that I knew just because I needed people to talk to. And went through the whole thing, all the the ABC series and all, and then went into the past and so on. And the thing is, I've tried to get a wide range of guests as well. There's people like your good friend here, Al Kennedy, who's been on a few times, and obviously he is very deeply invested in all things Marvel. On the other hand, I've had people who know nothing at all about anything to do with it, including one of my favourite ones was with Joanne Shepherd, who's a literary reviewer, who did a sort of second look at, well, I call it Avengers Assemble. I know that everyone does, but took a second look at that, and she knew nothing about any of them, bar having seen the Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk TV series when she was 4 or 5. And that was fascinating because everything in it was new to her. And if I was having to explain Rick Jones and things like that. So I do a couple of other things. Do a nostalgia podcast called Looks Unfamiliar, where me and a guest talk about things that they remember that nobody else really ever seems to. And I've had some names on there and some people have just discovered on, Twitter and Instagram and so on, that there has occasionally been Marvel content on there. When I was a guest once, saw the Spider-Woman cartoon, which aged 5 or something, I absolutely loved. I gather it's not that popular now, and actually Al was on once and he talked about Janice Vell, the Forgotten Captain Marvel. And that is a really, really funny discussion because, having to talk about this character that not even a lot of Marvel fans are that au fait with in a sort of context where the wider world will get it. But yeah, that's all at timworthington.org if you want to have a listen in, and welcome on board, because I'm really really proud of It's Good Except It Sucks, because I feel, I keep them as short as possible. And it's just nice to be able to say what we like about things. Yes, there is a positive one about Morbius, believe it or not. And even one guest found something positive to say about the 2015 Fantastic Four, but I won't spoil what that was.
Well, I'd like you to, but maybe we'll do it later. What have been your favorite MCU things, would you say, overall? So we can get a kind of vibe for the sort of stuff that you like before we talk about this new series.
My favourites overall would be most of the Ant-Man movies. I have some thoughts about Quantumania, which I liked without loving. Guardians of the Galaxy, but I also loved Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I think is one of the greatest films ever made. Far From Home, I was very keen on. And I really, over and above everything else, I really love the Netflix shows, including, I'm going to have to be careful how I say this, Iron Fist. I thought wasn't brilliant, but I still liked it as part of everything. And I love The Defenders. Again, I know it's not popular, but I love that. And I loved Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well. There's very little of it. It's easy to say what I don't like, which is basically Thor: The Dark World, Inhumans, and season 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think that's it, really. I even think The Incredible Hulk is a good movie. It just isn't anything to do with the MCU at all.
Well, it's a shame Mike isn't here, because he'd love to meet a fellow defender of Iron Fist, which he will go to bat for. Yeah, there's 2 of you. Okay. Well, we'll get into it then. Let's take a look at Secret Invasion. I'll just do a quick rundown of the plot, just in case anyone who's listening on a podcast in a little while from now can get a little bit of a memory jog about what this episode was about. In the premiere of Secret Invasion, Nick Fury returns to Earth from his time aboard the Sabre space station to a muted welcome. Many of the refugee Skrulls he promised he'd find a new home planet for back in the 1990s have gone rogue, including Talos's grown-up daughter, Gaia. Talos remains Nick's close ally, and the two try to stop the terrorist plans of Skrull faction leader Gravik from being carried out in Russia, as an attack there that masquerades as being by the Americans could start World War III. But Nick, Talos, and Maria Hill fail to stop the attack, and Gravik guns down Maria in front of Fury's eyes as the episode comes to a close. Big shocks all round. I'm going to start with you, Tim. What did you think of this premiere episode?
I really enjoyed it, but I am wondering about the balance between whether it was more finding it interesting than finding it exciting throughout, because I think it's intriguing the direction they've chosen to go with this. I mean, given the overall context of, there are people for some reason that want superhero movies to fall. Would they have wanted the Westerns to fall in the 50s? Is it, I don't quite understand why people would say, I don't watch these things, therefore they must stop. But this is completely against sort of the perceived trend, the perceived style. It's more like, I would say, The Punisher, as in the Netflix The Punisher, not the Dolph Lundgren one. Let's be clear about that. There's nothing really like that. But it really struck me that there's very little in it, at least in this first episode, unless you count the, when you see the sort of reprogramming room and, the absorb their memories sort of business. There's nothing in it that's really that science fiction-y. Even them turning into Skrulls, they could just be, those devious foreign people in disguise. There is nothing at all on the table. It is like the sort of thing that people who would say, for example, don't watch Iron Fist. How dare you watch this very cerebral thing I've discovered on Hulu or something? It's what they would choose to watch. And it's interesting that they've taken that direction in this context.
So this felt like very prestige TV to you, in a way.
It did, but still with tongue very much in cheek, and also put character first and explanation first. I don't think anyone watching this who wasn't up to speed things would be confused by it. I suppose you could argue they don't really explain what the snap is, but you would have to have been snapped yourself, not to be aware of the fact that there was this huge franchise, had this huge storyline in it. So that's the one thing I think they don't provide any sort of background to, but everything else I think is really clearly set out. And again, I wouldn't recommend it as a jumping on point for people, but it could actually, in theory, serve as one.
See, I thought when I watched this, I thought it was actually not for MCU newbies. I couldn't imagine anyone being shocked by Everett K. Ross being unmasked as a Skrull. But perhaps if you're just watching it and you came into it and you knew nothing about the MCU, well, you'd be like, wow, he's an alien. You wouldn't even think to connect it to anything else anyway. Joe, what did you think of this first episode?
I mean, I thought it was fine, which sounds more down than I actually am with it. I agree with what Tim's saying, that it felt like a shift as far as genre goes. And this first episode is very exposition heavy, which I didn't have too much of a problem with because, it's all people that I like to watch. I could hear Samuel L. Jackson and Ben Mendelsohn and Olivia Colman talk about whatever and completely enjoy that. As far as kind of the jumping in for newbies, I agree that perhaps like the Everett K. Ross and the blip things might throw people, but I don't know. I got to agree that I felt like this was sort of trying to onboard folks that may not be interested in the usual kind of tights and capes sort of Marvel stuff, and give them a different genre within the world, which is something I've really wanted to see, in these shows. I hope they kind of stay the course, but this first episode, it felt like a lot of setup mostly for me, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Do you think people who watch, because there's spy shows like The Night Agent on Netflix and stuff like that are really popular. Do you feel like this is accessible in a similar way to perhaps like more casual viewers who just want a good spy story, or is it a little bit too involved?
That's an interesting question, because it gives you all the information you need right up front. Like, even if you don't know who Everett Ross is, you know who Martin Freeman is, and they give you enough to tell you, oh, he shouldn't be an alien. And even if you don't know what the blip is, the main thrust of Fury is old and has been out of step and is returning to a world that he may not be ready for. That's all legible enough. That said, I'm not a big spy thriller person in my regular life, so I don't know that it's fitting, that it's meeting that need. At least this particular episode, I didn't find it particularly thrilling or exciting. Even the last bits, like I said, kind of all set up. So, I don't know.
Well, Alec, we heard some of your thoughts last week, some non-spoilery thoughts, but here's your chance to open up a can of whatever on Secret Invasion. Feel free.
I don't know, man. I'm all about Tim's mission to find merit in these kind of stories, because I do think anything this huge is always worth talking about. Kind of the story of Western culture is tied up in the stories of these comic book movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and what they do well, what they don't well. But after having watched this episode twice, I find just so little that warrants any kind of discussion in it, one way or the other. It feels to me just plainly boring. Full stop. If I could only choose one word, it would be boring. I was bored. I don't think this is a particularly exciting way of telling the story. I don't think anybody's really on their A game. I'm sure there's room for improvement in the remaining 5 episodes. I won't judge the entire experience based on the first 6th of it. But yeah, I know the name of the show is Marvel Standom, and I want to stand so bad for you guys. I want to stand so bad. There's nothing I want more in the world to stand. But this, regretfully, I cannot stand. I think it's just boring. It's not worth discussion. It's not really worth doing anything with.
Is it the lack of superheroes? Is it the writing? Is it the pacing? What do you, as the TV editor here, when you turn your critical eye to it, what do you feel like the flaws are?
I think a lot of it comes down to writing. I do think it's structured strangely. I was rewatching it this morning, and I got like, again, it's a bit of a challenge to kind of get through the whole thing without my eyes glazing over. Another thing you guys have to keep in mind is that I watch, 150 hours of TV a week or so, like something absurd. So, like, I really need my attention grabbed. Like, it needs to slap me in the face so I can actually pay attention and not look at the increasingly large pile of screeners next to me. But structurally speaking, there's just weird things in this that don't work, that kind of like rob it of momentum a lot. When I was rewatching it this morning, I noticed there's the scene in which Talos and Nick encounter that Skrull and beat him up, and then the scene in which Maria and Talos meet Gaia are just back to back. Like, there's no space between them. Talos dusted himself off after that fight and went to an underground in Moscow to be like, now here's the next scene I need to do. There's just kind of like little forward momentum. A lot of it reminds me of the worst of these of the Marvel shows, in which it feels like they're doing things just to do them, not because the people on screen are compelled by their own motivations and desires to do them. I get what they're going for with Old Man Fury, and I like that conceptually, but I mean, ever since Skyfall, the James Bond movie, I feel like every single action franchise has acknowledged how old their lead is. And I just feel like it's a sign of like cultural decay almost. Like, we don't find new, younger actors, so we just trot out these old guys continually. But then we want to make the lampshade it by acknowledging that they're old. It's like, no, man, just let Sam Jackson cook. Like, let him do his thing. Despite my best efforts not to, I have thoughts and feelings on this.
Well, thank you for sharing them.
Okay, I'll go home.
Yeah, that's the end of the episode, folks. So the Skrulls in this, what in this is that everything's quite dour. Everything's quite grey. There's almost a Chernobyl vibe to this thing. But you do have aliens, running around. You do have actors running around in goofy green masks. It feels like that's a part of it that doesn't really work for me. I think it's because it is quite serious. And just that the juxtaposition of that against like Skrulls just doesn't work. I felt like Captain Marvel got the right idea by bringing these guys in. They're often outdated villains in a way, and to bring them in as allies and have it be a twist that they're actually good guys was really a wise decision. And now the messaging in this is like, if you invite refugees into your home, they could steal your jobs and become violent. And I feel like that's a very odd thing to wrap this series around, and very problematic. So I feel like they had lots of options. And last week we read a series called Meet the Skrulls, a Marvel Comics series, very good. But they chose to do this instead, and I guess because Secret Invasion, the event, the comic was such a big event, and so they feel like they have to make an event series. But they are making it with kind of minor characters in the MCU, so it's a bit of an odd mix.
Well, I will say, it's just occurred to me there's a slight danger that obviously we've only seen one episode out of 6, but that the plot could start to go down the same route as the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's just you mentioning, if you let refugees in, they may start, that being the undertone of it. That is exactly what happened with the Flag Smashers. And, that's a little bit of a concern. But I just wanted to bring up, you mentioning that it had that kind of, that dark feel, like Chernobyl, like a lot of contemporary shows, I watched it on my TV this morning, and I had 2 train journeys a day. On both of them, I saw people, because most of it is in darkness, struggling to watch it on their phones and their tablets, really sort of holding it up, like moving it around, trying to see what was happening. So obviously we live in this situation now where I don't even buy the thing about people saying, if you want to avoid spoilers, stay off social media, because you can't help it. You know, you get recommendations you don't want piped at you by Facebook and so on. You cannot avoid spoilers unless you turn off everything and lock yourself in one room until you've seen something. And so people are in the situation where they've got to try and watch something as soon as they can to avoid that. But if you then made a show they literally cannot watch, you know, does that make the streaming model a little bit less seaworthy than we're continually told it is? And so that's a completely different question to what do you make a Secret Invasion, but I feel there's some relevance in that.
I could go long on that, just because like there are certain things that I'm just no longer able to watch because I have like the most up-to-date Samsung TV that for some reason can't accommodate the most up-to-date streaming format on Netflix. Like whatever its HDR is or like its super HD vision, anything that came out on Netflix after like 2021 is just black sludge on my TV.
I want to go back just a second, though, and touch on the Falcon and Winter Soldier and the Captain Marvel sort of things, because I've got that same thought going into it. And I am the defender of Falcon and Winter Soldier here on the show, so, because I think for all the flaws that Alec has pointed out so well, I think that there's still something. I can't complain about a show that ends with Captain America giving people a speech. That's just what I want out of that character. You're spot on to point out that the politics of the show and its treatment of refugees is sketchy in a way that Captain Marvel wasn't. You know, that was the best part, I think, of that movie, besides Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson just kind of hanging out. That part's delightful. And then the way that it's cleverly put in this story about Mideast crisis and refugee crisis and told it in this great cosmic way was the best part of that movie. And as we talked about Falcon and Winter Soldier, it sets up this idea that displaced people and refugees are facing the legitimate crisis and are being ignored by the powers that be, only to kind of slap that down, as we talked about before. I fear that we're headed even more in that direction this way, because where Captain America, whether it's Steve Rogers or Sam Wilson, is, you know, the tension of Captain America is always that he is loyal to nothing but the dream, to, you know, do the Frank Miller great bit that often puts against, you know, this ideal that puts him against the actual America. That's not what Nick Fury ever is. Nick Fury is a spy, a nationalist, his job is to do nasty things for the good of his country. And so by placing him at the center of this, it moves away kind of those high-minded ideas that, for as flawed as maybe they were executed, especially in Falcon and Winter Soldier, they were at least going for it. I'm really afraid, and I don't see how they're going to get around it, by making Nick Fury the hero, that at the end of the day, America is going to have strong borders, is what he's going to be going for. He may be throwing on a red hat and replacing his cool knit cap by the end of it. I'm worried about that.
That makes a lot of sense, Joe. And while you were talking about that, it made me realize that a lot of the recent Marvel villains have had, for lack of a better word, like decent politics. Like they have generally the right idea, but then the execution is like, I'm going to blow up an orphanage to end racism or something like. I'm starting to realize, like literally just now as we're talking, I think that might be a byproduct of the writers of these shows and movies feeling that they have more latitude to write fresh stories for villains than they do the heroes. Because kind of like you said with Nick Fury and Cap, they're both fairly static. Like there's wiggle room, room for interpretation. But Steve Rogers has been around forever. Like he is who he is, and whatever latest writer from an indie movie that Kevin Feige plucked from obscurity is not going to really feel empowered to mess around with him that much. Whereas they probably feel like they have more room to do something fresh with these villains, and that's why for so many movies in a row now, we get just kind of like these vaguely leftist bad guys who also want to kill a lot of people.
I mean, we haven't heard what's happened to the Flag Smasher cause, to those people who were displaced and had rightful anger about it and frustration. And we've not seen that that's been cleared up in any way. It just kind of gets left after Sam makes a speech. And I worry that with this show, it's gonna be like, well, we defeated the bad Skrulls that have had enough of being treated like crap by us, and then that's all that matters. Okay, bye. There were some explosions and some surprises and maybe a couple of cameos, and don't worry about that anymore. And it's like, but I want to get involved in something. Like, I want to care about something more than just for a few hours of this series. Like, I want to care about it, and especially as we are sort of getting involved with characters that perhaps haven't had much screen time, in terms of like Nick Fury. He had the Captain Marvel movie, but other than that, he's only popped up briefly, and it's just so great that Samuel L. Jackson's been given this opportunity to do more on screen. And then we have Maria Hill, who we're going to talk about now. Obviously, we may have thought that, yes, indeed, she R.I.P. Maria, R.I.P. to a real one. We may have thought she was the co-star of this series, but Kobe Smulders is Maria Hill is dead after this episode. A shocking climax to the episode. If you know and care who Maria Hill is, if you do not, maybe it's just okay. That chick's dead now. How do we feel about this climax? Is the Marvel fridging Maria Hill? The usual discourse, of course, online among the stands and just people who watch this stuff because they are in it and they're in it till the end. Alec, any thoughts on Maria's death?
No.
I will wait to see. Sorry, in terms of the fridging aspect, I think it's something they've avoided very, very well. So far, whereas you look at, as much as I love Deadpool 2, that has an example of blatant fridging, in a movie based on the character that the term fridging was invented for. But I think the MCU have generally avoided that. Even when there's been motivation, like the Star-Lord Gamora thing in Infinity War, it's not quite, because he does the stupidest, most calamitous thing in the whole movie. It's not a heroic thing at all. So how Nick Fury reacts to it will be interesting, because this is Nick Fury. This isn't somebody who will just say guru revenge. So yeah, but I'm not mad generally on killing characters off anyway. I mean, I don't know, because I'm really from sort of a Doctor Who background as well, and there is, famously there's that Christopher Eccleston one at the Doctor Dances where he actually says at the end, just for once nobody dies. That's a really important moment. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist. But what's considered to be the best story of the 60s, Fury from the Deep, no character dies in. And, people have this obsession with killing characters. That was a criticism I've heard of heroes a lot, was they never kill anyone off. Why do they need to? I don't, but it's almost like in this, it just felt like adding a beat to the end of the episode. It sounds like a disappointing thing about the whole episode, really. It wasn't, as a cliffhanger, it's not very inventive. That's, to use another Doctor Who analogy, as literal as the one where Sylvester McCoy was hanging off a cliff at the end of the episode, which did actually happen. Nobody's ever seen that. But yeah, that I've felt kind of, that's, ironically, that missed the target a bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It was, I have a lot of affection for comic book Maria Hill. And Kobe Smulders is likable on screen, but what's her character? I mean, she gets a couple of fun moments pushing back at Fury in this episode, but I don't feel like this is a terribly great loss, and it makes the episode feel cynical in that way, and opens it up for, like you said, those fridging complaints, which, depending on where the next episode goes or after that, may or may not be valid. But it was a bummer of an ending, not because, oh no, Maria Hill's dead, but why would you do that? The cost is going to has so little payoff right now.
So Smulders has been playing Maria Hill for 11 years in the MCU, on and off. They've not spent much time on their character. Is that fair to say? I don't think they've ever had any interest in expanding her character anywhere. And so just to see her gunned down, just to prove to Nick that this situation is serious, is personal. Things just got personal, it's the sort of trope. Feels like kind of, well, I guess you did that, but it would have been nicer to see Maria maybe explored a bit further instead of just gunned down. But whatever, I'm sure there are plenty of people that were shocked by it, and it made for a good cliffhanger for them for the first episode. And maybe people will come back next week to see if she's makes it out somehow, or her body turns into a Skrull or something like that. But I'm not sure how many people will be coming back for next episode. We'll wait and see on that one. Another thing I wanted to talk about was Olivia Colman in this, because obviously she's a great actress. She isn't given much to do in this first episode, but she manages to make a meal out of it because she's Olivia Colman. She's brilliant. How do we feel about her character? And are we looking forward to seeing more of her in the future? And the same for Emilia Clarke, actually, because she tends to get the rough end of the stick a bit after Game of Thrones. And a lot of people saying that, she's not a very good actress and stuff like that. I don't personally agree with that, but I think it's just the Terminator genesis of it all that didn't really go well for her, and there's been a couple of other projects that haven't really made a big splash. Are these good additions to the MCU?
All right, I need to interject just for a second and say Last Christmas is great. She needs to be in more rom-coms. She's delightful in that. That's a really good movie. You guys should all watch it, even if you think that the twist is ridiculous. So I need to stick up for her there.
Okay, is that a Paul Feige?
It is a Paul Feige.
Feige? I don't know.
Feige.
Yeah. Feige.
Is it Feige? Okay.
Not Paul Feig. Paul Feig. Yeah.
Yeah, is that a Paul Feig movie?
It is a Paul Feig movie, and I think it's one of his better ones, since he's kind of hit or miss. But anyway, just needed to throw that out there. As far as your actual question, they're all likable on screen. I mean, especially like you said, the Olivia Colman bit, just to they just said, do your thing, and sure enough, her thing is delightful. I don't know that I'm actually that involved in what she was saying. I mean, it's just one more person who shows up to put the screws to Fury and say, you've lost a step. And at that point, I'm like, yeah, we got it. He's behind. We don't need that. But again, it's exposition delivered delightfully. So what are you going to do?
Olivia Colman is the one aspect of this show that I can really be unreservedly enthusiastic about. Any complaints I have about this show, always know it comes with an asterisk of except for Olivia Colman's screen time. And I'm not even I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as Olivia Colman super fan. I've always enjoyed it when she pops up in things, but I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of all of Olivia Colman's obscure British TV roles. I'm just not about the Coleman life like that.
You need to enter your Coleman era, Alex. She's on it.
She is so transparently better than any other single thing on screen when she's on it in this show. And yeah, she's awesome. I would watch. Should have just made the show about her. As for the Emilia Clarke of it all, though, Joe, you're absolutely right. I did not see that film. But if you watch just Emilia Clarke in interviews or whatever, which I did many times as a Game of Thrones fan and covering the show for so many years, she is a level 90 goofball.
Best season ever.
She's just a little anime character who has a hilarious laugh and a big smile and is just a goober. And I don't know why. I guess it's because of the Daenerys of it all, but I don't feel like getting cast in this role is a particularly good use of her talents.
I liked what she did, but also, again, there's a danger of, while they're very different characters, we haven't really met Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Vanessa. I can never, Allegra de Fontaine. But it's kind of a similar character being catapulted in from nowhere. And my worry about that, which I have about quite, most Marvel things at the moment, is things need to be tied together a bit more right now, rather than they seem to be developing so many separate strands all at once. and they can't all dovetail together. I think it's going to get more complicated in that I still have a suspicion they're going to somehow bring Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. back into this. I think Daredevil Born Again, given that it's 18 episodes, and we know the Punisher's turning up, we're going to find out what happened to Luke and Jessica, certainly during the snap, maybe Cloak and Dagger, people like that. There's too much, I think, going on at once. And I'm not sure that having two characters who are casual observers might seem to be the same character until they actually give them some proper character and background. It's maybe the wisest move. That's not a reflection on Olivia Colman, who, I've thought was brilliant, saying she has one line in the day-to-day, I think, which is a British sort of news satire sketch show in the early 90s. But I actually remember noticing her in that, in a show that had Armando Iannucci, Minnie Driver, Chris Morris. So, she stood out as a performer all that time. But I'm more concerned about the position of the character, really.
She definitely stands out here too, and like physically, she in this very sort of grey palette. She walks in a very bright red suit, and is immediately a very colourful character. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of her. I could watch a whole show with Olivia Colman, MI6 agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something. That's fine. So, Tim, do you think that we might get some Daisy Johnson action here? I think it's been rumoured, hasn't it?
That's the rumour. I mean, I'd be happy to see Fitz and Simmons, to be honest, because I think they were such brilliant characters that have been so underused, and there's more to them. And there was a rumour, it's no difficult clearing it up, that there was a deleted scene from No Way Home where Doctor Strange phoned Simmons while he was stuck in that mathematical metaverse thing. But there was also a rumour that Danny Rand was waiting in Matt Murdock's office in one scene. So you never know how true these things are or not, because for years there was the rumour of Captain Marvel showing up at the end of Age of Ultron, which I thought was nonsense, and then years later that clip does come out. But given the sort of people they've brought back and the sort of people they're about to bring back, we're going to get Tim Blake Nelson as the leader in Captain America New World Order. They would be mad to throw away Quake. That's Chloe Bennett made such a good. There's something you can almost latch onto about that character. She's playing more than just a damaged secret agent who can push things over by moving her hands. She gave it a real the attachment that Daisy formed to every character in so many different ways. I think is as much down to her as it is down to the writing and the direction. And they would have to be off their trolleys not to bring her back in some way. And this would seem to be an ideal place for it. But what do I know? They keep wrong-footing me with things I think are an absolute cert. So
I can see her fitting back into the MCU fairly easily at this point. And I mean, they've introduced so many new characters that it's fine.
Chloe Bennett was just did a close to a season-long arc on Dave, the FX show Dave, and she was incredible.
Did you watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Alec? Or
nope.
No, not a single episode.
Not one.
Start with season 4 if you go to it. That's and then go back and watch the others, because that's when it gets really good.
Yeah, the first 3 seasons are very much like superhero admin show, but not in that bureaucratic way you like.
That sounds, hang on a sec.
You were about to say
too hasty to dismiss the superhero
right now. This is supposed to be a series that's full of twists, Secret Invasion, and I feel like we've had a couple in this episode. Any predictions going forward? Where do you think this ends up? Are we going to just wrap it all up and then, Nick Fury goes back up to Saber and just in time for the Marvels, or is this going to have repercussions or any major effect on the story going forward?
You know what? I'm famously wrong with every one of my predictions. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a bold one. Please. That Marvel is going to step away or step around their Kang / Jonathan Majors problem and they're going to use the Skrulls to set up the Kree Skrull War, which is a major Avengers event, and that's what the Kang Dynasty is going to actually be about. So this is going to set up the new phase of Marvel. That's my prediction.
Do you think the Kang Dynasty is going in the bin, Joe?
Honestly, yes. I 100% do.
I
don't know that they're going to replace it with, Operation Galactic Storm or Kree Skrull War or whatever those are, but oh no, Kang is gone.
How about you, Tim? Any predictions for this one?
Well, just to follow on from that, I mean, I didn't see why the Kang Dynasty was needed when you've got Secret Wars. I mean, whichever Secret Wars it is, I mean, that's big enough on its own. You've either got everyone fighting each other or remnants below the universe is smashed together. And, that is fine. I mean, I might get cancelled for saying this, but up until stuff happened, I was thinking, wow, this film isn't quite working, but Kang is brilliant. I was actually quite frightened of him in the cinema. Genuinely, as a fully grown adult. And that's the way things go when things like this happen. But I think you could lose it. There are ways forward. And I think, to be honest with you, given that they're in need of course correction, and the fact that this has been pushed back a few times and re-entered post-production a few times, and there were reshoots and pickups, I would be astonished if a couple of characters we thought we'd seen the back of don't turn out to have been Skrulls all along. The main one being Black Widow. Now, whether that means, Scarlett Johansson has never said, I'm done with that, the way some other people have. And there's also the potential for Lake Bell, who voiced her in What If, looks enough like Scarlett Johansson. Genuinely, you put her in that costume, you would not notice much difference. I honestly think we are going to see some kind of reappearance of Natasha.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, Tim, but it's possible, right? She said she was working on a secret project to use the word secret.
I wasn't aware of that. Well, that provides further fuel for speculation then.
As Lee says in the comments, Lake Bell was in Wakanda forever.
Briefly.
Very briefly. And then
that never seems to stop them though, does it?
Never. No. So
Afri Woodward, isn't she coming up for a third role now? So
yeah. Alec, any predictions?
So this is probably, this is definitely the post episode 1 crankiness talking. And I would love for them to prove me wrong. I think by the end of this, absolutely nothing of consequence will have happened. And a year from now, it will be like Secret Invasion was never on the air.
I think that's a bold prediction, Alec.
I mean, look, in my ideal world, what I would like to see are so many Skrull reveals that it becomes comical, like the rake stepping gag of how it's funny at first and then gets lame and then gets funny again. I would like them to reveal that hundreds of recognizable Marvel characters are Skrulls.
Just like the comic.
Yeah, that's the direction I would like to see them in. I would like to just even lean into the goofiness of it. Just I would like a situation where in the finale I'm laughing increasingly harder at the audacity of it each time. But my official on the record prediction that we can address again after episode 6 is that absolutely nothing of consequence will happen. And in a year from now, it will be like Secret Invasion never aired.
Yeah. I mean, I was, I think probably for me, it's going to be Rhodey and that new president played by Dermot Mulroney. Possibly too, although I think he might be back in Captain America 4, so maybe not. But Rhodey almost for sure I can see being a Skrull. And yeah, I'd like to see some justice for Sharon Carter, actually. Just so it felt like when they'd announced Secret Invasion, they were like, oh, we're just going to undo the Sharon Carter is the power broker by revealing that she's a Skrull. I think it's probably too obvious at this point, but it would be nice to see some justice for some characters that have kind of been shelved or mistreated over the years and just revealed that they've been a Skrull all along, and here they are, they're back and they're shiny and new and they have a new opportunity to do something. Okay, thank you all for watching and putting up with me while Mike's away. He will probably be back next week. Let's just say I'm about 67% sure, which is over 50. Make sure you're subscribing to us wherever you're listening or watching right now. Don't forget to check out our web home of denofgeek.com, where you can find all our Marvel coverage. Drop us a line and let us know your burning questions and what you want us to cover in upcoming episodes. We're Marvel Standom on Twitter and on Instagram. If you came in late, you'll be able to watch this entire episode on denofgeek.com or our YouTube home, Den of Geek US. Don't forget you can check out our past episodes there and also wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to our special guests, Joe George and Tim Worthington. Thank you very much for joining me this week. And Alec, of course. Thanks to Andrew Halley, the best producer in any corner of the multiverse. Thanks to Den of Geek social media coordinator Lee Parham for moderating the chat today. And go follow our TikTok, Den of Geek TV, where Lee is doing amazing work. A special shout out to Michael R. for making the podcast version of this show all it can be. And most of all, thank you all for watching, listening, following, and subscribing. This has been Marvel Standom on the Den of Geek Network. Until next week, Secret Invasion Episode 2, please be good to each other and stay safe.